So I'll start with a question that someone asked on YouTube. That's actually a very useful question. How do you use awareness to live in peace when you live in a society that promotes greed, school shootings, student loans, people doing whatever it takes to survive, get ahead, get more security, when your community is unconscious or unaware? How do you operate? So look at that question for yourself, because that's a question that probably any one of you could ask, yes? Yeah. But the reason I think it's a good question is because it reveals the difference between understanding these teachings and practices from a personal perspective or from the perspective of a personality to understanding what these teachings actually are. Because if you look at the question, the question lands like a reasonable question, doesn't it? It lands like a reasonable question. How do you use awareness to live in peace when you live in a society that promotes greed, all the rest of it, right? Live in a world like this world. How do you use awareness to live in peace when you live in a world like this world? War, corruption, murder, all kinds of difficulties. And those are just the general difficulties of the environment, of the society that we live in. And then you have the personal difficulties, like your own mind, what your addictions are, or what you're suffering from in terms of anxiety or depression and so forth, the personal version of the suffering. So there's the societal version of the suffering, and then there's the personal version of the suffering. So the answer to that question is important. And the answer to that question is you don't use awareness to live in peace. You don't use awareness to live in peace, because the you that you're referring to that would use awareness to live in peace is the personality. So basically you're saying, how do I as a personality use awareness to live in peace? Well, you don't, and you can't. Because the whole process of the teachings and the practices that we're talking about here is not that you use awareness, but rather that you are awareness. You don't use awareness. That would be the personality's view. You are awareness would be the truth. And so then you could ask, okay, all right, how does that work in terms of dealing with the world we live in, the society, the world, and then the personal world? How does it work? Well, the way it works is that the awareness, what the teachings tell us is the awareness that you and I are is peace. It doesn't make something peaceful, it is peace. It doesn't cause you to be happy, it is happy. Right? It doesn't create satisfaction, it is satisfied. Okay? So that's the available possibility, is to experience that. Well, okay. And so then how do you experience that? Because the peace, the satisfaction, and the happiness that's available happens when the suffering ends. This is an important thing to understand about these things. The personality will look at peace, satisfaction, and happiness as something it's going to gain, right? Something it's going to get, right? But that's part of the misunderstanding about it. The happiness, satisfaction, and well-being that's available is always available when you're being what you are. So it's not a question of getting it or something that will happen. It's something that's always available. Well, okay, it's always available in spite of the personal suffering, in spite of the suffering that is a function of the world that we live in. It goes back to that saying that, when you're awake and you know who you are and you're experiencing yourself as awareness, you're in the world but not of the world. What's that mean? It means you may be in the world, but the world's not in you. You may be in the world, but the world's not in you. What do I mean by that? Well, the world's not in you in terms of that you don't spend time in your mind thinking about the world, thinking about negativity, being afraid of life, thinking about how bad it is, thinking about what's going to happen to you, thinking about what has happened to you, thinking about what will happen to you. That's the source of the suffering, is being involved in the thinking activity. And the thinking activity is generating the idea that you're a physical body and a personality. So the whole source of suffering is coming from this conditioned thinking activity that is going on all the time. You know, that is playing in your head all the time, that is playing in your body all the time, that's playing in your emotions all the time. And this is the reason the world sucks. This is the reason that, that society is sick. Because people who are suffering this way and believe they are a physical body and a personality behave strangely. You know, they become stupid, they become ignorant, they become impulsive. They start to function as a survival operation. And the idea of the survival operations means that I'm threatened. That's why I have to survive, right? So if I'm going to function as a survival operation, then I have to identify who's trying to get me. Who's trying to get me? And I have to be prepared to deal with them if they try and get me and try and hurt me, or, you know. So can you see the whole world comes out of that? The whole world comes out of that. Now you have war, right? And now you have ignorant people who are believing in having leaders that are as crazy and ignorant as they are, proposing that we as a society continue to operate the same way as we have been operating, that has caused nothing but more suffering, addiction, and corruption. So the source of all the suffering, the source of the way the world is a function of ignorance. It's a function of people who don't know who they are. It's a function of people who are following the thought process and the conditioning, which is a fear-based, survival-based operation. They're following that, and it's having them behave in ways that are dangerous to themselves and to others. It's having them function, use their energy to try and escape from the threat, right? To try and tranquilize themselves with medication and alcohol and marijuana and TV and pornography and, you know, whatever else. You fill in the blanks. You know, there's an endless amount of things available now to distract yourself, to provide you with temporary pleasure, you know, through altering your mood, altering your consciousness, you know, tranquilizing the body, you know, numbing out the body and so forth, right? So that's all part of this world. So the truth is that if you understand that, this is what the teachings tell us. This is what the Buddha realized when he started to become a seeker, to find out if there was anything that could alleviate this situation. And the thing that can alleviate this situation that he discovered was meditation. And he discovered that simply to sit still and be silent and pay attention to the mental activity, and to understand that the mental activity is creating a condition of suffering. When you identify with the thinking, and when you be the person the thinking tells you you are, you're in the world of suffering. You know, you're in the world of suffering. You're reacting to life. You're trying to be in control. You're trying to change things. You know, you're trying to play the game of life in a way where you can have some security and some peace. You know, you're pursuing peace, you're pursuing happiness and so forth. And it's an endless process that doesn't go anywhere. You know, this is one of the reasons that people end up getting interested in meditation, because you begin to realize that this has been going on for a while now, and every time I think I found a way out, it turns not to be a way out. Turns out not to be a way out. Turns out to be a temporary form of gratification or pleasure that ends up turning into suffering again. So this is not workable. This is an unworkable situation. And if you come to realize that, and if out of that realization you become interested in looking to see, is there something I'm missing here? Is there something that could allow me to really realize this possibility that I hear these teachings talk about, these teachers talk about, these consciousness teachers, these religious people, these people that are talking about the practices that go along with the teachings that come from the East. So the answer to that question is important, because it's basically saying that no, we're not using awareness. We're not using awareness. We're practicing being that. We're practicing being that awareness, and we're practicing learning how not to pay attention to the mental activity that, if we do pay attention to that and identify with it, brings us into a world of suffering. So that's what the practices are all about, and I hope that suffices to answer that question. The personality is, the way the personality processes what's happening is it's always processing it in terms of, is it what it should be? Is it what I want it to be? Is it what it's supposed to be? So that's another angle to talk about this and look at this. And you can see, if you look at this from that angle, that it's generating suffering. That process generates suffering. That's one of the reasons that I say to my clients that I work with in my private practice, start to pay attention to how often your life is not the way you think it's supposed to be. And start to understand that's why you're suffering. And that thinking is a voice in your head that's running all the time that you believe is you, and therefore you are a sufferer, suffering, right? And so it's very important to begin to learn that that's simply not the case. It's simply not true. And to live as if that's true is called ignorance. To live as if that's true is called ignorance. Good point, Jerry. Yeah. Who else? Yes.
When we do our formal meditation practice, is that meant to be kind of a timeout from life?
It's it's an inevitable part of the process. You have to remember that the only place you have to come from when you enter into this process, when you begin to what they call walk the path, the only place you have to come from when you enter into these teachings and these practices is where you have always been, which is believing that you are a physical body and being a personality. That's the only place you have to come from. So because that's the case, you will try and use, just like he said, you will try and use awareness to escape. That's the way it'll occur for you. You'll think of it that way. It'll occur to you as a way of having a break from the suffering. Getting a break from the suffering. And so that's an inevitable part of the process. And so what happens with that is you can't help yourself but continue to do it that way. You can't help yourself. Just like this person who asked this question, he was honestly asking a question. He really wanted to know, how do you expect us to use awareness to escape from this suffering, right? Yeah, so what has to happen is the personality has to become a seeker, become a meditator, and go through the whole process. The ego will get involved. The ego will be proud of being a meditator, right? The ego will think it's got an edge on the rest of the world because it's practicing meditation and because it's learning about this truth. That's inevitable. It's inevitable, right? So if you don't think that's happened for you, you haven't been paying attention. To be a teacher of these teachings, part of that process is to deal with your ego, to recognize that it's inevitable that your ego is going to get involved and say, oh, you're cool. You're really cool. You're really cool. You really know your shit, right? But that's the same voice that you're learning not to identify with, right? So it's the same thing for any practitioner, any student of these teachings. You will invariably go through a process where you will try and use meditation the way you try and use anything else you've tried to use in order to be in control and avoid suffering. And then what will happen, and for those of you who have been involved in this process, and if you've been meditating consistently, right, you will begin to notice the frustration you're experiencing, right? You'll begin to notice that part of the understanding you have is that you are this awareness. In Zen, they talk about Kensho. What's Kensho? Kensho means that you wake up from the dream. Kensho means that you wake up from being a personality in a physical body, and you actually are experiencing being the awareness itself. Now, I talked about this on Sunday, that you can't experience being what you are, right? So there's a problem with language here. You just have to get the idea. You can't experience being what you are because what you are is not an experience because it's not a subject-object situation. What you are, the being of it, is the experience of it, but it's not really an experience because it's not something that's apart from you that you're experiencing. It's something that you're being. It's a subject-subject experience, right? So what will invariably happen is you will seek to be what you already are. You see, you will seek to be what you already are. You can't do it any other way. There's no other way for you to do it. You will seek to be what you already are. And as you seek to be what you already are, you will feel like you're failing and you're frustrated and how long is it going to take and what do I got to do and what am I doing wrong, right? You'll go through all that. You have to go through all that, right? And you have to experience the frustration and you have to experience that as long as you maintain the idea that something's going to happen. As long as you maintain the idea that something that has not happened is going to happen, you will continue to be in that process. When the time comes, when it occurs to you, when it dawns on you that what you're attempting to do is impossible because it's already occurred. You already are that. Right? When that occurs to you, you're getting close. You're getting close when it occurs to you that way, right? And when you get to the point where you totally give up on the possibility of becoming what you already are, when you totally give that up, you know, when you're done with that, and not only are you done with that, but you don't even care. See, now watch. Not only are you done with that, but you don't even care whether you ever wake up anymore. You don't even care whether you wake up. You know, it's immaterial. That's irrelevant. I'm done with that. I'm totally done with that, right? Can you see that to be in that place where you don't care and you're done with it means that you're there? You see what I'm saying? Because you realize the whole process is a joke. The whole process is a joke. You've been trying to be what you already are, and the way to realize what you already are is to realize you never had to try to be it.
But then at that point, you might just give up and not even meditate anymore. I feel like, you know, thinking that this is going to get somewhere. That, you know, you were saying like you don't want to get anything out of this, but that's the motivation, I think, for most of us to keep meditating on a consistent basis because we think we're going to progress and, you know, get somewhere. Mm-hmm. But if we just say, oh, forget it, I'm never going to get this, then I can see me just not even meditating anymore and then getting further away from it.
Yeah, yeah. That would be part of the process that I described as the personality.
Right.
The personality could give up on this, and there have been people that have been in this class that have given up on the process. And just went back and continued to live the life of the person and a personality. And they may even get to the point where they were saying, oh, that's a lot of bullshit. That's not true, you know. That's a cult. Those people believe that nonsense. So that's still the personality, you see. That's still the personality. So that's not what I'm talking about when I say that you can get to a point where you actually realize your true nature, right? Because when I say you get to a point where you can realize your true nature, you don't care anymore about realizing it because you are aware of the fact that there's no possibility of ever becoming it. You're not giving up like you don't, you know, like you give up trying. You're not giving up like you give up trying and you stop meditating, you stop coming to class and you just go do other things. No, that's still the personality. That's still the personality. A personality's got a pattern of doing that, trying things, doesn't it? Personality tries things, you know. People come to this class and they try it to see if they like it, to see how it feels, right? Which of course means they won't be coming back. Because when you try to meditate, what you'll walk away with is, I won't keep trying that anymore because that was such a failure. I sat there and was thinking the whole time, right? So you can't, see, even meditation is something, if you understand what it really is, you can't try it. You have to understand, you have to go through a process of dealing with what the experience of meditation is like in the very beginning. And it's the same way for everybody in the very beginning. You sit there and you're putting up with trying to meditate. You're putting up with trying to meditate.
Yeah,
So you have to persist.
Story of a guy who kept going back to his teacher every day trying to answer the questions, and then at the end he said, "Oh no, I don't care," and then he hugged him like.
That's common, you know, that's common. That's one of the reasons koans, you know, in one of the traditions, Buddhist traditions, they use koans. Koans are like riddles. They're like questions that you can't answer through reason and logic, like what is the sound of one hand clapping, right, is a koan. Or another koan is what is it? What is it, right? And the way the koans work is you meet with the teacher and you try and answer the koan. The thing about it that's interesting is that the koan doesn't have an answer. The koan really doesn't have an answer. It's not about answering the koan, it's about how you're relating to the question that tells the teacher whether you get it or not, right? It's how you're relating to the question. If you keep trying to get the right answer to the question without realizing the question, the purpose of the question is to cause your mind not to be able to function. It's to cause the gears to lock up in your head. It's to cause the mind to, not be able to deal with the answer to the question. And it's the same kind of frustration that I referred to in terms of practicing meditation a long time and getting to a point where you feel like you didn't get it, you're not getting it, you probably never will get it, right? You've got to be able to persist, and you've got to be able to stay with the process and not give up and continue to do it with the understanding that that's what it takes to get where you want to end up. That's what it takes. Your mind is not geared to meditate. Your mind is not geared to experience the truth. It's not geared for that. That's why as you try and practice meditation and you try and get to the place where you experience this waking up kind of thing, it doesn't work and it doesn't happen. It's an impossibility. It's an impossibility. The only possibility of going through that process and actually experiencing the truth of what you are is to go through that process and be frustrated and want to give up and want to quit and be tired of it, and go through all the annoyance about the whole thing, and finally get to a place where you realize that, everything I've ever done to wake up hasn't worked. So one thing I can stop doing is doing any of that. Right? And then the realization may come up where you realize that, wait a minute, hasn't the teacher been saying that it's not necessary to do anything to be what you already are? Hasn't the teacher been saying that? Maybe this is what he meant. Maybe he was talking about what I've been doing that will never work. Right? So there is no way to tell. See, this is very individualized. There's no way to tell how any of you as personalities will navigate this process. There's no way to tell. Some people will just give up and walk away, and not. Other people will continue to be involved with the process, and be right about the process must be mistaken. Be right about the process must be mistaken. There's something you're not telling me. There's something There's something I'm missing here. I must not have the instructions correct. That's how the mind will keep getting involved in the process. And you've just got to keep going. You have to keep walking the path. This is one of the reasons why it's so important to study the teachings and to have a teacher, so the teacher can tell you, you're fine. You're fine, you're doing fine. You're supposed to be frustrated. You as a personality should be frustrated, trying to become what you already are. You should be frustrated. Keep going. Do more of it. It's like a psychologist friend of mine I ran into in the bathroom, and he's been studying the teachings and the Vedanta teachings and practicing meditation and all this stuff, and he's a typical person in the process, right? And when I ran into him, I said, how's it going? And he said, I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall. I said, good, bang it harder. Bang it harder. That's how you get through this, is you have to just continue to accept the fact that the personality is going to keep trying to make something happen. That's the only way it knows how to be. That's the only way it knows how to function.
So the real challenge for me now is out in the world. I mean, this meditation and listening to your talks and studying the teachings, it's been great, but I feel like the real challenge is when we leave here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we deal with everyday life. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's been the challenge. I mean, there are times where personality just comes out of nowhere, and you're for an hour in your personality, and just all of a sudden you'll see it. And that, to me, that's the practice. Mm-hmm.
Or I can see it happening, but I can't get out of it. You know what I mean? Like, why am I anxious? Why am I doing this to myself? This is like, but it just persists. Yeah.
So there's a post-awakening part of this, right? So I've been talking about pre-awakening part, suffering as a personality. There's a post-awakening part. And the post-awakening part is when you have realized yourself, when you have experienced being what you are, okay? The programming keeps running, right? Keeps running in your head, right? So one way to talk about the process after awakening is to say that one of the things you have to do to practice after awakening is realize that the world that you are being challenged by, right? Like when you said out there, right?
Out there.
Isn't out there. The world that you've been being challenged by is in your head. It's in your head. How does it show up in your head? It shows up in your head in thinking. It shows up in your head in thinking. Don't forget, the freedom and the experience of peace and happiness and well-being is available when you stop suffering. What's causing the suffering? Thinking. About what? The world.
That makes it sound like thinking's a bad thing.
Well, you could interpret it that way, but it's not saying that thinking is a bad thing. What is a bad thing is identifying with thinking. Thinking is just a program. It's innocent, right? And not only is it innocent, but there are times when the thinking is being used for practical purposes. This is a source of confusion for people because a lot of times people think, well, I know that I can think about something. I can cause thoughts to happen in my head about something. Therefore, I'm the thinker. So then when they're not causing thoughts to happen in their head about something and the thinking goes on default, goes on automatic, right? They think, I must be doing that too. I must be doing that too, right? Which makes me want to not tell people about what I think because they'll think I'm as crazy as I think I am. See, that's one of the things in some of these group things like they used to do in EST, right, or the Landmark Forum now. They get a bunch of people together and they stimulate them to start getting them to express themselves, to express their mental states, right? And after they start doing that for a while and they start bouncing that off somebody who's stable and just keeps reflecting it back to them, the room starts to realize, wait a minute, we're all crazy. We've all been trying to hide from the other people that were crazy, but now we've gotten together and let our defenses come down and started to share, what's going on for us individually. We start to realize we're all as crazy as each other. We don't have to hide it anymore.
No.
We don't have to hide it anymore. We can understand that being crazy is common. Being crazy is being human. Being crazy is being identified with the mental process. It's no big deal. It can be resolved relatively quickly as soon as you begin to realize that you're not the voice in your head. And you start to get a separation and then a divorce from the voice in your head. And when you get that separation and divorce from the voice in your head, right? When it's playing, after you realize your true nature, when it's playing, you lose interest. You just lose interest, right? The same thing is in the world, that what happens in the world is if you're awake, you start living from an awake experience, which means that you don't hang around with people who are too crazy. You don't hang around with people who are too crazy because that'll get on you. They'll get it on you, right? So you don't want to get it on you. Now, you have to deal with the people that are your immediate family and the people that you're immediately related to, even if they're crazy, right? But then there's another way called skillful means in terms of how you deal with that. And the way you deal with that is that since you know you're not your personality, right? Whenever there's conflict with those people, you let them win. You let them win. If there's any arguments, if there's any conflict, you surrender. You just let them have the victory, right? Because you realize your personality is nothing that you need to defend. Your personality is nothing you need to identify with and be right about anything that's going on. And if you know that that's the case, then your interest becomes to be in peace. Your interest becomes to be related to people with unconditional love. Anything that gets in the way of that, you'll concede it. You'll concede it. You want to argue with me? You win. You win. No matter what the argument is, you win. As long as you don't hurt me physically, you know what I mean? And as long as the cost of your being crazy is not something that is too detrimental. Other than that, not a problem. Be crazy as you want.